and setting up.
Great. Thank you all for joining us virtually this afternoon to talk about the climate crisis. My name is Sean Moylanen. I'm the district-wide organizer for the Green Team here in Colorado, Congressional District 6. This afternoon, I'm joined by Dr. Kristen Nordenholtz, a Green Team member and frontline doctor working here in our community. I'm Susan Nettle, a Mountain West advocate for environmental entrepreneurs, or E2. Kendra Hughes of EDF Action, as well as by our Green Team members, volunteers, and fellowship recipients. And I welcome you live to our Facebook event for those of you joining us through Facebook. So the Green Team is a project of NRDC Action Fund and EDF Action, two national environmental groups who in summer of 2019 joined forces to launch an on-the-ground focused advocacy effort with organizers like myself in 7 key congressional districts across 4 states nationwide. So our mission is to build public support for protecting our beautiful environment, advancing clean energy, and fighting against the effects of climate change. You can follow our work on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Green Team USA. And feel free to follow up by email with me at sean@greenteamaction.org if you're interested in being involved further with our work here in Colorado. I'd like to take this time to thank Representative Crow for being a champion on the environment. We're thrilled to have had Representative Crow on board with our priority legislation, the 100% Clean Economy Act, as an original co-sponsor, actually, in late 2019. And so we're really grateful for the opportunity of you joining us to continue this conversation tonight, Congressman. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sean. And am I up? It's my turn. All right. Thanks, Sean. Thanks to the Green Team. It's so good to be back with all of you. I really enjoyed working with all of you over the last few years on really this one of the most critical issues we face right now as a species and as a planet. A few just introductory remarks. I don't want to take a lot of time here because I want more of this to be a conversation, and I obviously want to go to questions. But I'm gonna kind of frame it this way. You know, there's this prevailing notion, or there has been a prevailing notion in politics in decades past and elected office, that incrementalism, baby steps, is the way to approach most issues. And there certainly are some issues where there's a time and place for that, where you need to kind of see how things work and see how things go so you can make changes and tweaks. The challenge with this issue is that we are out of time, right? The data has shown us that we have no time left, that the crisis isn't in the future. The crisis is now. The costs, the challenges are already on us. Whether we're talking about pandemics that we're dealing with now, and people have been warning us for years that one of the big challenges and one of the things that are going to come out of climate change are more pandemics and disease, whether it's refugee displacement, ocean rise, extreme weather, national security challenges, all of it is now on us. This is a present challenge, and we are out of time. That's all the data shows. So the danger now is not one of incrementalism. The danger is not acting boldly. The danger has now become not making the big changes. So with that in mind, I've worked really hard to try to do the things that are within my power, to try to do the things that uniquely kind of fit my roles in Congress, to use my position on the Armed Services Committee to really drive home the dangers of national security to this issue, to really make the Department of Defense, which by the way is the largest user of fossil fuels in the US government, to make it a leader on renewable energy and sustainability in the development of microgrids, to work on things like my Save Energy Act to address the residential carbon footprint element of this, but also to support the efforts of my colleagues on the Select Committee of the Climate Crisis and to sign on to the energy 100% clean energy bill, because we have to have things that are binding. We have to have things that are very specific and actionable, and we have to have things that engage our broad coalition, including the Blue-Green Alliance, making sure that we are engaging and working with our brothers and sisters in labor as we make the transition, so that our labor brothers and sisters and folks in industry can move with us and make changes that benefit them and their families as well. So the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis came out with its report. They used 12 pillars, all the way from infrastructure to national security to public health to social justice and several other pillars. And then they've identified very specific actionable legislation, in many cases legislation that's already pending in the House, and said, here are things that we can do now, today, that are binding, that we're already working on to move those 12 pillars forward. It's a great piece of work. It's one that I fully support, and I'm going to be fighting hard to make sure we make that change. So with that, I would love to stop there and open it up to questions and have a conversation, but I look forward to working with all of you on this.
Yes, thank you so much, Representative, for those thoughtful opening comments. Thank you. I know we have a lot to talk about, so with that, I'll turn it over to our first question from member Dr. Kristen Nordenholtz.
Thank you, Representative Crow. You serve on the Armed Services Committee, where you oversee the Department of Defense and large sections of the Department of Energy. Thank you. How is the House Armed Services Committee thinking about the national to COVID, preparing for future pandemics, and of course, the international crisis like climate change?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Nordenholtz. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us here. So we're doing a number of things. Number one, I just mentioned that the DoD is the largest user of fossil fuels, but what a lot of people don't realize is it also has the largest renewable energy portfolio of any government agency in the US government. It's been a leader on developing renewable energy for a very long time. And in fact, there are great examples of microgrids that have been successfully developed. Fort Hood, Texas. So you use the example of Fort Hood, Texas, one of the largest military bases in the U.S. military inventory, and it's off the grid, right? It produces its own energy. It actually developed a microgrid. It gets its energy now from wind and solar, and there's a couple of great things about that. Number one, it's saving millions of dollars a year on its energy bill, so it's good for the taxpayer. Its carbon footprint has been reduced significantly, so it's good for the environment, and it's less susceptible to cyber attack and extreme weather as well. So it's good for the base and it's good for the military. So it's a win-win-win situation that if we make those initial investments, it actually is good for everybody. And we're trying to ramp that up military-wide. I passed or got a bill enacted last year called the MIRA Act, the Military Installation Resiliency Assuredness Act. Now, as of December, every major military installation in the Department of Defense has to do a comprehensive assessment of the impacts of climate change, extreme weather, and external factors on its resiliency as a base. And so we're going to better be able to understand what are the costs of a changing climate, because last year we actually had to spend $6 billion to rebuild 2 Air Force bases that were decimated by extreme weather. So when people say, oh, it's expensive to respond to this crisis, my response is, it's more expensive not to respond to the crisis. We're already paying for it to very large dollar amounts. It's actually less expensive to get our arms around it. So we're working on that as well. The other thing we're doing is I actually co-sponsored a bill that we passed just a couple of weeks ago out of the committee with Jim Langevin and Don Bacon. It's actually a bipartisan effort that's going to require the Department of Defense to do a comprehensive assessment of the impacts of climate change on our national security and our military worldwide. It's going to be really important to do. And then the last piece that you mentioned is the pandemic. So I have another bill called the RASP Act. It's also a bipartisan bill, been able to get some Republican support because I'm of the belief that I'm not interested in messaging bills. I'm actually interested in getting things done and getting things done now. So to the extent that I can work things in a way that get broad support, I'm going to do that because we have to be moving the ball down the field. So the RASP Act does that. It's going to require a comprehensive assessment of the federal government's various authorities, spending, and have the agencies enter into a memorandum of understanding to delineate their roles and responsibilities in responding to pandemics, because very clearly we weren't ready for this. And we have to be making the moves now to be better prepared.
Thank you.
Great. Now we'll turn it over to Susan.
Thank you. It's great to be part of this conversation, and thank you, Representative Crow, for all the work you have done and are doing for the benefit of Colorado and the nation. My question is, at the start of 2020, clean energy employment increased for the 5th straight year, growing beyond 3.3 million workers nationwide. Despite how far the clean energy sector has come over the last 5 years, the economic impact of COVID-19 is devastating to businesses and workers from coast to coast. More than 620,000 clean energy workers have lost their jobs. As America looks to recover from COVID-19 pandemic, no other part of the energy sector can deliver the economic benefits as quickly or as significantly as clean energy. How do you see Congress developing and implementing policies to both put people back to work and address the climate crisis?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. You're absolutely right in that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted the clean energy, the renewable energy sector. So let's look at Colorado. So the 5 years prior to the pandemic, the clean energy sector, the renewable energy sector in Colorado had double-digit growth for 5 years consecutive. Only industry that for 5 consecutive years had double-digit growth, which tells me that that's an industry sector that's worth investment, right? Because that's where the jobs are. That's where the future is. Now, since the pandemic, the unemployment rate within that industry is double the loss of the average unemployment rate. So put another way, twice as many people are losing jobs in the renewable energy sector as they are in most other sectors. So that's a big problem. It's a big problem not only because of unemployment and the lives and livelihoods of those workers, but because it's setting us back greatly in the inroads we've made. So the answer here is a couple of fold. Number one, I'm a big supporter of the investment tax credit, the production tax credits, to make sure that we're renewing those tax credits that have been a catalyst for growth and investment in those sectors. But that's not going to be enough. That's as a minimum. What I'm a firm believer is in the power of infrastructure investment. We need to be making direct investments in this industry, because one of the biggest challenges we have in building out a renewable energy economy and having 100% clean energy is we don't actually have the infrastructure to do it. We can't move energy from where the sun is shining and the wind is blowing right now to where it's not and where it's needed. We have to build massive infrastructure projects to do that, to transmit that power. That's why I was a huge supporter of the recent infrastructure bill, the $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. I'm actually the co-chair of the infrastructure task force for a coalition in the House that has made investment in clean and renewable energy infrastructure a priority, because that, as the saying goes, is the long pole in the tent, right? The tent doesn't stand unless you have the infrastructure to do it. And why it's the long pole is this is going to take the longest to do. Building out that infrastructure takes a long time. Even if we started today, which we're not, it will take a decade to build it out. So we've got to get it started. We have to make those investments now, and that's the single biggest thing we can do.
Hi, Congressman. My name is Rachel. I'm one of the Green Team Fellows. I live in the Denver area. My question for you is, on Tuesday, June 30th, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi joined Chair Kathy Castor and members of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis in unveiling a comprehensive congressional action plan to solve the climate crisis. We're thrilled about the recent SCCC report, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on the report and if there were any specific solutions that really stuck out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I referenced that in my opening remarks, this report. I think it's a really important effort, and I applaud the leadership's prioritization of this. So here's what I love about this, is that it's so specific. It's an over 500-page report. And I don't like over 500-page reports, but I do like the fact that it's completely comprehensive, right? It has 12 pillars, and each of those pillars has really actionable stuff. In many cases, it's legislation that's already pending that shows how we get to point A to point B, right? So this issue, we know what we need to do, right? This isn't a matter of figuring out what needs to happen. We know what needs to happen. It's in that report. And the action and the legislation in many cases that's already been introduced is there. So that's the roadmap to get us to where we need to be. I think it's a great roadmap that we just now need to follow. So what I'm most excited about in the report is number one of my bills is in there, right? So a couple of my bills actually are in there. My Save Energy Act, some of my stuff on Department of Defense. So some of the efforts that we've already been working on were included in that effort, which we're really excited about. But more broadly is the infrastructure piece. I just cannot underemphasize or overemphasize that. Infrastructure is a win-win-win. It's going to put people back to work. It's good for the working class. It's good for our unions. It's good for our economy, and it's great for the environment because it's the infrastructure that we need to build out, the transmission that needs to be built out, and the wind and solar farms and everything else to get where we need to go. And since we know we're out of time, that's what we need to start now. I mean, we need to move it really fast because it's going to take a decade or more to build that out.
Great, now we'll turn it over to another fellowship recipient, Logan.
Hi, Congressman. I have a question for you as well, which is that we know that climate change directly impacts and intensifies extreme weather events, including flooding and wildfires. I've actually seen that recently in Colorado. As you know, the Chart Ridge 2 fire gave us a glimpse of the effects of these fires on our community. So we're curious what solutions Congress needs to implement in order to help communities become more resilient, especially as frontline communities who are disproportionately impacted by these changes in weather patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that question. So some of you might know that my spouse actually studies these issues. She is one of the national experts on extreme weather and fires and floods and everything. I'm gonna use some of her work and knowledge here. For a very long time, researchers weren't able to draw a direct connection between climate change and extreme weather because the challenge with that is that there are so few extreme weather events comparatively that you couldn't attribute any one extreme weather event. There just wasn't a big enough data set to attribute any one extreme weather event to the changing climate. That actually has recently changed. There's now a modeling in data that show that there is a direct connection, and we're able to draw that connection now, and that actually was a fairly recent development. So we now know what's happening, whereas before we highly suspected that it was happening. Now we have pretty concrete data that show it. We're seeing it in the West, right? We see wildfires, we see water scarcity. In the West, water is a major problem for us, and it's going to continue to be a big problem for us. We see on the coastlines increased hurricane activity. I'll use Norfolk Naval Base, a huge naval base in the U.S. inventory, and it's flooding on an almost weekly basis now. Our dry docks, piers, and other things, the infrastructure is flooding regularly, and we can't use it, and we're going to have to rebuild it, and that's going to cost tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars to actually do that. So these costs are real, and we're starting to better understand how expensive this is going to be for us, and not just from a military perspective, but you talk about cities like New Orleans and Miami and New York City and others that are going to have to invest trillions of dollars in infrastructure to mitigate flooding along the coastlines. So it's already going to be really expensive. It's going to get far more expensive. That's why I'm a big believer in actually being smart about our investments, and we can make smart investments now to greatly mitigate much larger damage down the road.
Hi, I'm Tyler, and I live in Littleton, Colorado, and I'm your final question.
All right.
My question for you is, as an original co-sponsor of the Great American Outdoors Act, could you tell us a little bit about the bill and what you think will happen next with it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a great effort. It's really going to be, I think, it's going to make a lot of inroads into creating a permanent funding stream for Land and Water Conservation Act, right? So for a long time, we've had to go and fight over and over again for the funding stream for the repair and maintenance of our public lands and parks that have, depending upon what estimates you look at, anywhere from $5 to $10 billion of deferred maintenance on many of our parks and public lands. And it's going to go a long way towards resolving that and creating that public funding stream that we've needed for so long, so we're not having to have this battle over and over again. So I will be supporting it and voting for it in the House, no doubt about that. All right.
Well, I know we do have a strict time schedule and you've got a lot of important things to head off to, Representative Crow. So I do, again, just want to thank you so much for continuing this conversation with our green team here in the community. And for those of you out there joining us through Facebook Live, I'd like to thank you as well. I hope to see you all in the future. And I hope you stay involved with the work we're doing and other groups are doing to stop the effects of the climate crisis. So again, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Green Team USA. You can also follow up with me personally through email at sean@greenteamaction.org. And I'll have Susan comment some of those things in the comment boxes below as well. And I also wanted to extend an invite to the online community and anyone on this call as well to join us for our National Green Team call tomorrow at 4:30 Mountain Time. We'll be taking you through a rundown of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis Report. And we'll be talking about ways to take action with John Cross, a campaign manager at NRDC. So we'll include that link in the comments below. So again, thank you so much for Representative Crow, our partner organizations and members for joining us. Signing off until next time.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for doing all the work you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Okay.